The day a barefoot girl did what a dozen specialists with framed diplomas could not. I was the man in the suit who almost rolled my son right past her without looking. Yeah, that happened. And if you think money buys every answer, let me tell you, money can build a house so quiet you hear your own fear breathe, but it can't buy back a 7-year-old's laugh. You know what I mean. It can't buy hope at retail. It just waits for you to deserve it. The autumn sun had that flattering light the city loves on postcards, gold on glass, long shadows over the plaza. And none of it touched me because all I felt was the weight of the wheelchair handles in my palms, that cool stainless steel that had come to define our days. I'm Robert Hale. And the boy slouched in the chair was my son, Evan, sandy hair in his eyes, lavender polo he used to choose himself. Now just a shirt I buttoned for him because standing had become a memory no therapy could drag back into the room. We'd done the tour, Switzerland, Boston, Los Angeles. The whole greatest hits album of modern medicine, and every time the verdict came with the same careful tone therapists used to cushion a punch. Permanent, irreversible, adjust your expectations, they'd say, and I would nod like a professional at bad news in a boardroom, while something inside me folded smaller and smaller, until there wasn't room for light. Evan stopped smiling first, then talking much, then even turning his wheels unless I asked, and I told myself I was fine because I had a plan for everything, except this. Except the way silence moves into a house and sets rules none of us voted on. We were crossing the plaza after yet another appointment that said, "Come back in 6 weeks." And I was already half in my next meeting when I heard a small voice that didn't ask for spare change or pity, just said, "Hey," like a bell in a fog bank, and Evan's head turned before mine did. She was maybe 8, brown skin glowing against a faded beige shirt under a light blue vest that had seen better days, braids neat and tight, jeans thin at the knees, no shoes. Her toes dark from the pavement, and if you want the truth, my first instinct was the usual one. Keep moving, stranger danger, my son is fragile. The reflex of a father who has failed at too many things and is desperate to control the ones he can. But Evan rolled himself a couple inches forward on his own, which he hadn't done without prompting in months, and that tiny motion cracked the wall I'd built, just enough light to make me hesitate. "I'm Zoe," she said, not with a practiced beggar's pitch, but with the directness of a kid who has learned to introduce herself fast or get ignored. "Want to play?" she asked, like she was offering him a secret rather than a game. I started to say he can't. Then I stopped because Evan's fingers were already reaching and Zoe's hand was there, small and warm and sure, and she was moving their joined hands in a pattern, left, right, tap, tap, pause, like something you'd see on a schoolyard, except it landed with a kind of precision I felt in my chest. "Follow me," she said, and Evan, God, Evan tried to mirror her. The corners of his mouth twitching like a muscle remembering its job, and the sound that came out of him a second later wasn't a polite laugh you offer adults to make them feel better. It was a spill of joy, unguarded, and I swear the plaza went quiet for me. The traffic, the pigeons, the whole city holding its breath at a boy laughing again. Zoe changed the rhythm, 2 claps. A fist bump, a spin, and Evan leaned in, competitive, a little trash talk under his breath like he used to do with his cousins. "Oh yeah, watch this." And the chair nudged forward another inch under his own power, and I felt my throat close because I'd forgotten what hope does to your body. It hurts. It hurts first. Let me back up a sec to say I didn't know any of this at the time, but later I learned the pattern wasn't random. It was something Zoe picked up from a shelter volunteer named Miss Lila, a former neuro nurse who ran a little corner class for kids, hand clap games that crossed the midline, left meets right, right meets left, little bridges that wake up sleepy pathways in the brain. That's how she explained it when I tracked her down months later. But in that moment, I just saw a barefoot kid with a grin orchestrating a miracle with rhythm and audacity. A security guard noticed us and started over. Chin said in that way people get when policy is about to trump humanity. "No loitering," he said, looking at Zoe, not at my son whose life was opening right there on the concrete. I stepped toward him out of habit, ready to solve the problem. But Evan's hand tightened on Zoe's, and I heard my own voice say, "Give us a minute, please." And just like that, the rules changed. Zoe leaned close to Evan's ear and whispered something I couldn't catch, a conspirator's tone, secret instructions, and Evan's eyes widened. Then he gripped his wheels and pushed, one shaky turn. Then another, and I swear my heart started matching the rhythm. Tap, tap, push, push, until they were 2 yards away, and she circled around him, crouched to meet his gaze. Okay, now for the fun part, she said, voice low and certain. Stand. And I did what you're about to do. I protested. He can't. It's not safe. Afraid of falling, of failing again. But she looked up at me with this calm that wasn't defiance. It was like she'd already seen the next frame of the movie. Let him try, she said. I'm right here. Evan set his palms on the armrests, arms trembling, jaw tight. And then his legs, those quiet legs, almost flinched, a spark through wire. And he rose. Not clean or stable, not for long. But he rose, knees wobbling, eyes wild. And he said the words I hadn't allowed myself to dream he'd say again. Dad, I'm doing it. And I was there, hands ready. But I didn't touch him until his knees buckled and Zoe caught him from the front with that careful kid strength that knows you save someone by lowering, not yanking. And she laughed, told you. People in the plaza kept walking, a few glanced over, no one applauded. And I was glad, because this wasn't a show. It was a small resurrection, and those are private. Those belong to the people who refused to stop breathing while the world moved on. Who are you? I asked, because no other question mattered. And she said, I'm Zoe. 8. Sometimes I sleep outside. Sometimes shelters, it's fine. And even in the word fine you could hear the weight, the practiced shrug. And Evan, the kid who had retreated into silence, said she's my friend, Dad. Like a declaration, like a line drawn in wet cement. And I could see how he was looking at her, not with pity, with respect. And it did something to me I'm still trying to name. Something like a map rearranging. Where are your parents? I asked. And she looked at the ground and said, don't have any, in a way that told me follow-ups would be extraction, not care. And then she pointed at Evan and said I saw him and he looked sad. So I thought maybe he needed someone to play with, like it was the simplest math. Here's the twist I didn't expect. Zoe knew more about courage than any adult in that plaza, including me. And when Miss Lila, the volunteer I mentioned, walked by just then with a bag of groceries and said, Zoe, you keeping out of trouble, the two of them shared a look that told me this girl had a community that was scrappy and real, invisible to men like me until it saved our children in broad daylight. Miss Lila clocked Evan's chair, knelt, checked his knee reflex with a knuckle like it was a routine she couldn't help, whispered to Zoe, midline crossing, count out loud, baby. And Zoe started a new pattern, 1, 2, 3, clap, 1, 2, 3, clap, and Evan's hands fired like pistons finding rhythm. And that was the moment I stopped thinking in terms of charity and started thinking in terms of family. I said the first reckless, necessary thing that came to my mouth, you're coming with us. And Zoe blinked like I'd told a joke. What? And I said you're not sleeping outside tonight. Not if I can help it. Not ever again if you'll let me. And I meant it more than I've meant anything. And Evan reached for her hand and said please, and she nodded, tears bright, then swiped them away fast the way kids learn to do when the world won't give them permission to be fragile. The town car idled at the curb like a cliche I was ashamed of until Zoe opened the door and whistled low like she was stepping into a spaceship, and Evan scooted in beside her, and their knees bumped. And they both laughed like the sound made its own weather. We drove home through streets I'd only ever experienced from behind tinted glass, but that night I saw my city through Zoe's eyes. The murals, the steam from manholes, a woman in a red coat dancing with her own shadow. And I'll tell you, something rearranged inside me, furniture moved, doors I'd locked years ago cracked open. At the house, too big, too quiet. Zoe stood barefoot on the marble foyer and left faint dusky prints behind, and the staff looked at me with questions I'd answer later. And Evan said, can we try again? And we did, hand claps echoing off expensive walls that finally heard a human rhythm. 1, 2, 3, clap. And he stood for 5 seconds this time, maybe 6. Long enough for possibility to take up permanent residence. I made calls, lawyers, social services, Miss Lila. A dozen strings I could pull for once for the right reason. And the conversations were messy and human, not transactional, and that was the point. And I could feel the line of my old life and the line of this new one crossing like Zoe's hands, left to right to left, building a bridge so we could meet in the middle. That night. Here's the thing. The satisfying part you want, because stories should give you one moment where justice feels like it clicked into place. The next morning, Evan took 2 steps, tiny, wobbly. The sort of therapist would caution you not to celebrate too much, but we celebrated anyway. Breakfast went cold on the table, while Zoe hooped and clapped, and Evan yelled, "I did it," and I laughed, the kind of laugh that shakes dust out of a man's soul. And for one clean instant it felt like the world had agreed to be kind. And then, because this is life and not a parable, the questions came. Neighbors whispering about the barefoot girl in the marble house, a caseworker asking if this was rescue or performance, a board member wondering if I had lost my mind. And I looked at all of them and thought maybe I finally found it. So you tell me, did I cross a line or finally draw one in the right place? Did we do the impossible or just prove the experts were looking in the wrong direction? Is family a contract or a promise you make when a child holds out a hand in the bright light of a public plaza and says, "Play with me"? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what justice looks like here. Tell me where the line is between protection and pride and community responsibility. And if this story moved you, share it forward so another parent who's drowning in quiet hears a laugh and turns around. Because hope shows up barefoot sometimes. And you either make room or you miss your miracle.